All right, guys. Tonight's notes is the first 2 years of the Civil War. And we're going to be looking at the strategies of the North and South as they approach the Civil War and the early battles in 1861 and 1862. And we're going to get started with the strategies for the North and the South, beginning with the North. And you can see this picture above that says Scott's Great Snake alludes to the North strategy as they approached the Civil War. So the North strategy was called the Anaconda Plan. It was an anaconda like the snake in the sense that they wanted to wrap themselves around the north or around the South and kind of constrict it. All right, try and bind the southern states into submission. And the parts of this plan can kind of be remembered with ABC. A was to attack and capture Richmond, the capital of the Confederacy. B stood for blockade the southern coast, prevent goods from being shipped in and out of these of the Confederacy of these southern states heading to Europe or heading in from outside of the United States. And then C, cut the South in half by gaining control of the Mississippi River and isolating places like Missouri and Texas and Arkansas from the rest of the South. The North also wanted to rely on their superior resources. The North had more men, it had more materials, and basically was hoping to wear down and outlast the South with its superior numbers and resources. One question that's asked is why did the North need to fight the Civil War? Why couldn't they have just let the South secede from the Union and establish their own country? Well, first of all, they depended on Southern cotton for their industry. These textile mills in the North depended on cheap cotton being grown in the South and brought up to the North. They also wanted to be able to sell their finished goods to the South without having to worry about tariffs. And if these were two different countries, we would see the southern country or the Confederacy might put tariffs on goods coming in from the North. And they were also concerned about having an unfriendly neighbor with a very long border directly south of it. And they were also concerned that if the South breaks away, establishes its own country, it might not be strong enough to prevent a foreign power from coming in and conquering it. And so they didn't want another country to come in and take over the South like maybe France or Spain or England. The South strategy was very different. They had to rely on the strengths that they had. They didn't have as many men, they didn't have as many raw materials, but they did have certain advantages over the North. First of all, they had better generals. The leadership of the Confederate Army had significantly more experience and was just overall better, at least at the beginning of the war, than their Union counterparts. Second of all, Confederate soldiers were dedicated fighters. They were fighting for a particular cause that they believed in, and they were, for the most part, volunteer forces who really were motivated to fight in this battle. Most of the Civil War is also going to be fought in the South, so they had the advantage in terms of knowledge of the land. You can see there's a lot of similarities between the Confederate forces in the Civil War as the colonial forces in the American Revolution. They also hoped, the second part of their strategy was to get foreign assistance. They wanted to get help from England and France because they knew, just like the North relied on cheap Southern cotton, so did these places. England was using its textile mills and depended on cheap Southern cotton as well. And then the final part of the South strategy, they knew they didn't necessarily need to win the war in the sense that they needed to capture northern cities and force them into submission. What they really wanted to happen is just keep fighting until the North is just too tired to continue. keep fighting until the North finally gives up and just recognizes the independence of the southern states. So the start of the war, our first major battles. Our first battles are going to be fought in Virginia. It began with heavy fighting in Virginia. The first battle was the Battle of Manassas. That's the term most of the Confederacy and will use. It's also called the First Battle of Bull Run. And this was a Southern victory. But both sides are going to suffer very heavy casualties. Both the Union and the Confederacy go into the Civil War expecting a quick war, hopefully few casualties, maybe over within a fighting season or two. But after this first battle, both sides quickly realize that this is not going to be a quick fight. This is not going to be an easy war, and there are going to be a lot of casualties. And early on in the fighting in Virginia, the North, the Union is losing many of the battles. And they fail to capture Richmond, the first part of the Anaconda Plan, Part A, attack and capture Richmond. The North also tried to institute its blockade. They did have a superior navy, but it didn't have enough ships to blockade the entire southern coastline. So there were ways for southern goods to get in and out. So Part B of the Anaconda Plan was incomplete. The North does send an army into Tennessee, where they are successful in some ways. So that's the beginning of the Part C of the Anaconda Plan, trying to take over the Mississippi River to cut the Confederacy in half. So this is one area where the Union does see some level of success early on. As we move forward in 1862, specifically September, the Confederate General Robert E. Lee tries to bring the fighting to the North, get it out of the South in Virginia and bring it to the North. And so he marches his army north into Maryland, where we have a major battle at Antietam. Antietam was the single bloodiest day of fighting in the history of the United States. There were over 22,000 casualties in a single day at this battle, casualties including killed, wounded, or missing. The Battle of Antietam overall is really a stalemate. Neither side gains a huge advantage, but Robert E. Lee decides after the Battle of Antietam that maybe it's not the right time to try and bring the fighting to the North. So he turns back around and marches back towards Virginia. And so it's really a tie on the field, but because the Confederate forces retreat back into Virginia, the North kind of takes some positives out of this. President Lincoln at the time had written this Emancipation Proclamation that would free the slaves in the South if the South didn't give up. Now, he wanted to issue this Emancipation Proclamation after a major victory. North didn't really have any significant major victories at this point, but he took the Battle of Antietam as it's close enough. And we're going to spend some more time looking at this Emancipation Proclamation and going into more detail on some of these early battles, but this should give you a good overview of the first couple years of the war.